From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
G'day, good evening. Happy Sunday wherever you happen to be. Thank you very much for watching the program this evening. Thank you to Corey. We'll see you again next week. Now, I want to start with some very good news, particularly for the women of Australia. Cervical cancer is something that has taken too many lives over too many years. It is something that, thanks to greater treatments and, of course, vaccines, we've been able to see the numbers start to drop. But the good news I have for you tonight is that there is a massive chance that this could be eradicated from our country even sooner than people thought. Every year, and certainly last year, there were 942 women who were diagnosed with cervical cancer, and sadly 222 mothers, sisters, wives, mates, daughters lost their lives. Well, we learned today that it could be 5 years earlier than expected that we could see no women dying as a result of cervical cancer. This is huge news, and it was big news in Melbourne today. One of the people who's behind all of this, including the professor from the Australian Centre for Cervical Cancer Prevention, says the enormity of this announcement cannot be understated. It's a historic achievement for researchers, medical professionals, doctors, nurses, patients, and those who've recovered from cervical cancer, and for those that we have sadly lost. Strength and love to everyone who is battling this or any other form of cancer. Strength and love to anyone who has lost someone to cervical cancer. And certainly, as anyone who's had family members like mine who've died of things like ovarian cancer, we hope for a day where we can put these things behind us. It doesn't bring anyone back, but strength and love that there is some hope on the horizon for Australian women. Good stuff. Now, let's get to the stuff you really came to watch tonight, which is me blowing up. Now, as you know, a couple of weeks ago, the High Court made the disgraceful decision that people who should never be allowed into our community are allowed into the community because indefinite detention has been ruled to be illegal, even though this was the way to make sure that very bad people did not end up amongst us. These are not refugees. These are not asylum seekers. These are people who have been rejected multiple times, and many of whom have committed crimes while in the country, but for some reason have not been able to be deported from the country. And as you know, last week, the federal government was all at sea. Chief amongst them was clueless Claire O'Neill. Now, she's the Home Affairs Minister. Her responsibility is not just mouthing off about Donald Trump Jr. like she has in the past. She has responsibility for the Australian Border Force, for ASIO, for the Federal Police. She, of course, has said nothing about hate preachers that we should be booting from the country, or at the very least, telling us how she is keeping an eye on them. However, she thought that she had all the answers last week, when the reality was the government had no answers last week. Remember, she started off last week saying, oh, we can't change the legislation to deal around all of this. She even stood up on Thursday of last week and said there was a take it or leave it piece of legislation. And as you know, the opposition came to the defence of the government and actually helped them plug the holes in the bill. Now, as my colleague and friend Peter Credlin correctly points out, you need to remember every time, even though these laws are in place, it essentially is tightening the leash but not putting anyone back behind bars. Well, today, in an interview on this channel, Clueless Claire O'Neill, she said, I didn't even realise. I didn't think we were going to lose the High Court action, which would come to explain why the government, despite the fact that they said by the end of the week, oh, we've been planning for this for months. Reality was they let people out without visas and they had no legislation ready. In fact, they were planning to do it next year. This is the woman who is in charge of domestic security in this country. Have a listen to how clueless this minister is.
We knew that there was a High Court action on foot. We knew that it was 20 years of legal precedent, and we were advised that it was likely that the Commonwealth would win the case.
Oh, it's almost like the High Court was slightly more activist than the government expected it to be. Yet another reason why Australians made the right decision by spectacularly voting no in every state, even in Victoria. It was only the public service bubble of the ACT and, of course, the Teal seats that ended up backing in the Voice because they knew what this High Court would end up doing. Well, as you know, we were telling you last week that it was 50, then it was 80, then it was 90 people. Well, now there's a chance it could be as many as 300 people that are going to come out of detention. I repeat, none are refugees.
The 340 number is a group of people who have been in immigration detention for longer than a year. It is very unlikely that the High Court's ruling will apply to all of them.
Now, between her and the idiot immigration minister, they had no plan. They did not want to go into the parliament last week and put laws in place because these are the same people who decided that Australia, and Western Sydney in particular, should take back the ISIS brides. Remember when the community was saying they don't want them? This government didn't say anything about it. Their assumption was, after the High Court made its decision, that this was the, for want of a better term, get out of jail free card for many people who were still in detention. This is the same government that turned around and made permanent citizens of more than 50,000 people who illegally arrived here by boat and were not declared to be refugees. So their assumption was that this would come and go. Sure, we'd make some noise about it on Sky News and in some of the newspapers that they don't like, but they'd be able to cauterise this. But sometimes things are as bad as they seem, and that's why we had the week that we had last week. The government has been caught completely flat-footed, and I expect there'll be plenty more of it when Parliament returns again this week. Let's see. If Andrew Giles, the Immigration Minister, or clueless Claire O'Neill could do better than they did last week, because it's hard to work out how they could have done worse. But there's still plenty more pressure on them. Which of course means that the smoke signal was sent to the press gallery that when this government gets itself into trouble, there's only one move and one play. And multiple media organisations all decided to make the same play on the same day, which of course was get Dutton. Despite the fact that it was a terrible week for the Labor Party, despite the fact that the Labor Party was caught flat-footed, not having a response to essentially a yes-no question, the reality was that they decided to go Peter Dutton. Because, of course, Anthony Albanese, well, he was in the country for a few days before buggering off overseas again. Last week, of course, the Immigration Minister, as I've said, terrible performance. And even the people who do see the forest from the trees in Canberra were able to see this was a bad week, as they wrote in the Financial Review, as they wrote even at news.com.au. But as I say, the people who are going to be in the recipients of the Prime Ministerial Dirt Unit that we told you about a few weeks ago, where somebody's job full-time inside the Prime Minister's office isn't dealing with cost of living. It's about trying to find some way to recast Peter Dutton as extreme evil. Well, here's some examples of how, when all else fails, when the government is falling apart, when the wheels wobble on the Labor government, you've got to get Dutton. Now, Laura Tingle, writing in the Financial Review, but also gets run on the ABC's website, she said, this was a dark day for the way laws are made in Australia. Oh, yeah, Peter Dutton's fault that he was the one who actually had a solution to the problem the government wasn't prepared for. Meantime, over in The Guardian, Catherine Murphy, Dutton's strongman persona matches our grim times. But he has fired up his opponent as well. A reference to suggest that we're going to go back through the problem with women issues and all the rest of it. And this is straight out of the playbook that comes from the United States, where the Democrats have presided over an economy that most people believe is not working for them. So you flip it all to, you have to put up with Joe because Trump is so much worse. Oh, there was more. Also in The Guardian, they decided to refer to the week that has just been. Not, of course, being particularly critical of the government, but more so saying that political debate had sunk to a new low. And they found a way to get Scott Morrison in there as well, because God forbid we move on from the Prime Ministership of Scott Morrison. And then there was the effort in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age today, which says Peter Dutton is the new Tony Abbott, the politics of grievance, Dutton's Abbott-style strategy to regaining power. You can set your watch by this stuff. Now, the reality is that, as we've shown you multiple times, cost of living, the A1 issue in the country, the government having no real response to it, the government, despite having $20 billion extra than even they could spend, have told us that they will be doing nothing more. You see, they want to be able to go into the next election saying, oh, we've won on economic issues because we've produced a budget surplus. A budget surplus that, of course, is based off two major things. They now count the billions of dollars from the Future Fund and the billions of dollars that we send overseas in the resources sector. Both of which, without, this government would still be presiding over a deficit, just like they plan to do for the next 40 years, according to the Intergovernmental Report. Remember, this is the prediction that's going to take our population up to 40 billion people by the 2060s, and there'll be a deficit every single year between now and then. But a bit more on cost of living tonight, which is that we see that the pressures of cost of living, which do exist for everyone watching us right now and plenty of people that we know, is that now we learn via Western Australia, and this is the same place that, of course, had the stories a couple of weeks ago, where somebody who has a job but still lives in their car, has no running water, so they like to get ice from charities so that it will melt and keep things cool. And then they've got water at the end of the day. Well, people are now cutting back on dental procedures. According to WA Today, dental care is now out of reach for many Western Australians as cost of living pressures bite. Now, of course, anyone who's had problems with their teeth knows they don't get better by leaving them alone. They only get worse. And as you know, that can all spread into deeper issues to do with our collective health. And then there's the houses that we live in, the houses that we've now had an elbow dozen of interest rate rises, and families are spending up to anywhere between $14,000 and $30,000 a year that they are having to find extra on top of the mortgage payments that they were making before this government came to being. Well, Victoria Devine writes today that the middle class may well be for the chop, put simply, squeezed. As rich people get richer, rich people keep spending, rich people keep voting for teal politicians and governments that keep spending money, and people are not able to keep up with inflation. Inflation that the government won't do anything about. They are not cutting petrol taxes. Remember, it cost $3 billion for 25 cents for 6 months, yet nothing. The middle class, once the backbone of the nation, is rapidly diminishing, raising concerns about a potential decline in our collective standard of living. The idyllic image of the quarter-acre block and the Aussie dream is fading, replaced by a growing cost of living crisis that is reshaping our society. But don't expect anything from this Prime Minister because, of course, we know he's up and away in his beautiful private jet, Airbus Albo. Geez, he hates that term, but he lives up to it. Remember, of course, this is the bloke who is just coming back from a meeting with the leaders of the Asia-Pacific region, including the American and Chinese president, both of whom he's already met in the past few weeks. But he says, I'm allowed to fly wherever I want, whenever I want, because I'm awesome.
It is just a fact that part of the job of being Australian Prime Minister is to represent Australia and represent Australia in forums that matter, because in today's globalised economy, what happens here has a direct impact on Australian jobs and the Australian economy.
The problem was that nothing came out of the face-to-face meeting with Joe Biden that was about jobs. Nothing came out of the meeting with President Xi that was about jobs. But he had to meet them twice in a month because he had to meet them twice in the past month. And again, never forget when we're talking about Airbus Albo, that Airbus Albo has travelled so far since he became Prime Minister that he can fly to the moon and beyond. As the advertiser worked out, that he's travelled 385,586 kilometres. That's further than the distance it is from here to the moon, which is 384,400 kilometres. Now, this one's a few days old, but it's still worth playing on the television. Some clever sods have decided to pull together all of his different things that he said in public to say what we really think might be going on in his head about why so often he's in the sky.
I note that I've taken a lot more trips overseas than anyone could have possibly predicted. But the truth is, I love going up into the sky. Literally on my first day in office, within hours of being sworn in, I was on the plane, looking out the windows with a big smile on my face, delighted. There's nothing quite like sitting in a seat on a plane, looking out at the soft clouds, pretending that they're all fluffy white bunnies hopping in the sky. This is a really exciting activity that makes me very happy and a great way to spend taxpayers' money. And I'm really looking forward to meeting Winnie the Pooh on my holiday to China.
Very, very clever. Remix Matrix are the people you should follow on YouTube. They've also got plenty of videos whacking away at the conservative side of politics. But when they're laughing at your elbow, they're laughing at you. They're not laughing with you. Sure, the mainstream establishment, access media, well, they'll run off and run defence for you. Other people go, yeah, this joke's going to land, even if the Prime Minister doesn't that frequently in the country. Meantime, of course, the greatest failure of the Prime Ministership in terms of his agenda, the greatest failure, of course, is the inability to deal with cost of living, everything getting worse. But remember, Albo, $450 million up against the wall for a referendum that Australia rejected. They didn't just vote no, they voted hell no to it. Of course, the results of that referendum were very clear. Albo didn't get what he wanted despite the tears in the dirt in the middle of the country. We all know the no campaign successful in every single state with the exception of the ACT. Even Victoria voted no. Never forget this. Even Victoria voted no, and not just. It was very clear it was on the night. Well, of course, there's one word that we know is the second part of the Uluru Statement, which is voice, gone, then treaty, then truth, which we've been told many, many times is the next phase in all of this.
A process to get to treaty and agreement making.
It's a path to national treaty that acknowledges the pre-existing rights.
Treaty has always been the primary aspiration.
Through the work of Makarrata, treaty making and truth-telling.
Well, guess what? The Channel 9 newspapers, well, they decided to go off and see whether an opinion poll would produce a different result than a national referendum on these particular issues. And treaty is even less popular than the voice, according to the polls, which they dropped today. Only 33% of all voters want a treaty between Indigenous Australians and the rest of the country. A quarter of Labor voters say no, 57% of coalition voters say hell no, and the reason why the average is even larger than the result would actually be if you had the chance to vote on it is because the Greens voters close to 70%. And then there's a third part, which was, of course, voice, treaty, and then truth. What's the support for a Makarrata Commission? Now, remember, there's already money in the federal budget to establish one of these. Well, guess what? Again, 35% of people support it. 43% of Labor voters, 20% of coalition voters, 66% of Green voters. I must say, I'm impressed by whatever the 9% of Green voters who said no to the truth-telling part of all of this is. I'm not entirely sure why they keep voting for the Greens, but perhaps they're the ones up for grabs as swing votes into the next election. Now, as we speak and the weather changes, it's been particularly hot in certain parts of the country. And again, we turn our thoughts to what's been happening with fires in Queensland. The latest that we're hearing around the Darling Downs region and also some people in and around Toowoomba is that there have been, yes, another uptick in fires, and many people are being warned to keep an eye on these things. But remember, if you're told to leave, please leave.
We're hopeful at this stage, based on predictions from the Bureau of Meteorology, that we may see rainfall up around the 40-odd millimetres over the next 24 to 48 hours. So that would certainly be a welcome relief for us to see.
Strength and love to everyone who is there. Specific strength and love as well. We're giving a lot of it out tonight because a lot of it's needed. The son of the police commissioner in South Australia has been killed in a hit and run situation which took place on Friday night. His son is now gone. The commissioner, who no doubt when he was a beat police officer and as in charge of officers all day, every day, has had to go and knock on someone's door. Well, the message has now come to him that his son is now gone as a result of a hit and run. Here's Premier Malinauskas on the behalf of us all.
This is a day that we all dread, particularly those people within the Sapole family.
And again, to everyone who is victims, have had their lives touched, have had their families changed forever, we always think of you at times like this when these stories come up again and again and again and again, as they will, no doubt, over the coming holidays. More protests in most of the major capital cities today, demanding ceasefires. We will, of course, learn in the next couple of days that plenty of people were holding placards that they shouldn't have, but of course the organisers have no responsibility for that whatsoever. Well, interestingly, today there was a story first broken by the Washington Post, but then blasted out around the world by the Reuters news agency, that a ceasefire may well end up happening. It won't be a particularly long one. Apparently, it's the best part of 5 days. And Reuters suggested that Hamas and Israel have come to some sort of tentative deal. It'll mean that hostages are released and there will be 5 days of the stopping of the aerial bombardment. But the White House came out very quickly to say, no, not yet. So hopefully by this time tomorrow, there will be something. But even best case scenario here is we're looking down the barrel of 5 days in terms of a pause and not all of the hostages being released. We often talk on this show about other people's money, about how the politicians, the political class, love to spend your hard-earned dollars. As I've told you before, the best part of almost, 80% of Australians pay AYG tax, working taxes, well, it ends up going on paying for the public service. Well, what about this as a perfect example, where in Western Australia, the government has spent $300,000 because they wanted to add one word to a department. $300,000. Now, I also just want to quickly mention something that's going on inside the Liberal Party right now, which is that they are getting rid of some dead wood. And that's why people like Russell Broadbent, who's been in the Parliament for a long period of time, has lost. It's why he's, of course, thrown his toys out of the cot and gone to the crossbench, even though most analysis suggests that if he ran as an independent, that wouldn't be happening. Now, there's a lot of people who are very critical of the Tasmanian Liberal Bridget Archer. Now, often I will disagree with what she says, and often I will disagree with how frequently she crosses the floor. But as we speak, there is a move on to remove her from the seat of Bass. This is a stupid idea. She would be able to win the seat as an independent and as a Teal. And last time I checked, politics is about getting you to 76 seats. Now, if you get to 77, she can cross the floor as many times as she wants. Her number won't be relevant. Because she has crossed the floor as frequently as she has, she's no chance of becoming a minister. But if the Liberal Party wants to get anywhere near 76 seats at some point in time, probably a good idea to stick with the person who's been able to hold on to a seat that flips and flops at every single election, regardless of whether she toes the line all the time. Now, remember, if she wanted to pull the pin, she would have done so by now, and she definitely would have at the last election, when plenty of people to the left of the Liberal Party were searching for some sort of a life raft that wasn't the existing Liberal Party. She stayed loyal. Now, she's not loyal on every issue, but the Liberal Party means you're allowed to cross the floor. But can I show you very clearly why she should end up staying as the Liberal MP for Bass? Because have a look at how the seat flips and flops. Now, in 2010, Labor won it, then the Libs won it, then Labor won it, then the Libs won it. So flip-flop, flip-flop, flip-flop. She increased her margin while the government was losing, and she's the first person in a political generation to go back-to-back in the seat of Bass. Will she be a minister? No. Will she be a leader? No. Is she relevant in terms of getting you to 76 to a potential majority? Yes. And if you get to one seat more than that, her crossing the floor will mean nothing, apart from frequent appearances, like so many lefty Liberals do, on the ABC. But remember, of course, to all those lefty Liberals who say it's time to cross the floor constantly and argue against whatever your leader's position is, there is no mercy shown by the extreme left. Remember, it was the moderate Liberals who constantly talked about same-sex marriage, who constantly talked about climate change, and they all got wiped away by the Teals, who, of course, used Labor and Greens preferences to get rid of the Lib. And remember, as well, this is working on the left side of politics as well. In the seat of Griffith, which was formerly held by Kevin Rudd, slowly but surely the primary vote had went from the Labor Party easily holding that seat to eventually losing in the last election. And the MP who was losing it was Terry Butler, the one who was talking all day, every day about same-sex marriage and was even Albo's Environment Minister. She wasn't pure enough, so she got rolled by a Green. Expect that to be the pressure that exists on Anthony Albanese as they start to have a conversation about whether they can hold on to their majority at the next election. Now, there will be an early election because every first-term government has an early election. Will they be able to hold on to a majority or not? That's the question. Now, my view is that the Liberal Party has plenty of opportunities to go up the scales, but most likely is not going to be knocking on the door of 76 seats because of how those Teal seats are unlikely to move anytime soon. Labor will lose a few seats to the coalition because that's what always happens, again, after a first-term government. Remember what happened to the first-term government of Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard. They lost seats. First-term government of Tony Abbott into Malcolm Turnbull. They well and truly lost seats. First-term government of John Howard. He even lost the popular vote but was able to hold on to his majority way back in the late 1990s. So it is very, very rare for the government to go forwards. Instead, they go backwards. My suggestion is they're going to lose to the Greens in certain areas because younger voters, particularly renters, are going to be attracted to the Greens' nonsense, but still aggressive positions when it comes to renting. So watch this space. It'll be fascinating to see, but there is no need to get rid of Bridget Archer if you are somebody who is interested at all in the Liberal Party getting even close to government. She knows how to win the seat. She knows how to hold the seat. She knows how to grow the vote, even when the tide is going out. And this afternoon, we had the joy of being able to watch a Grand Prix in afternoon time here in Australia. It wasn't 3 o'clock in the morning or very late at night, and that was, of course, in Las Vegas. Now, I don't think it'll be at that time ever again because the race was basically being run at midnight and it was very cold. But it was a spectacular event. I've got to say I found the race a little bit boring, but no doubt plenty of people will turn up, more than 300,000, and it was very expensive to get the tickets there. Max Verstappen, surprise, surprise, ended up winning. But he even had a 5-second penalty, but still ended up winning the race by about another 5 seconds. That is called dominance in anyone's language. Next weekend.
What? Verstappen's in Vegas, stays in Vegas. Max Verstappen wins the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Viva Las Vegas.
My apologies. Again, the real grand final next weekend in Adelaide, the Adelaide 500, Saturday and Sunday. Good luck to Erebus, Brodie Kostecki and all of my mates there at Coca-Cola Racing. All right, quick break. Back with more. Let's have plenty to fire up about with Nicholas Rees and with Michael Kroger. We're just getting started. Tell me what your bold prediction for the week is, by the way. Oh, that's them and me. More in a sec.
Oh, here we go.
Thank you so much for watching. We are, of course, in the Tower of Talk, and we've moved the Man Cave to Melbourne tonight. I just wanted to see what things were like here, just to see the Jacinta Allen. It's the same. And joining us, of course, is none other than two of our favourites here in the room with us, none other than the great Michael Kroger and the wonderful Nicholas Rees. I like this. It's going okay.
3 weeks in, so I'm at my peak mo.
Look, it's not salt and pepper. It's, have you been colouring it a little bit?
Look, Paul, there are some tricks in show business we don't talk about.
I thought that might be the case. See, but you've just...
You know what they are. You know what they are. Those tricks.
Yeah, correct, yes.
How's the energy here tonight, though, gentlemen? This is like we could power Australia off the renewable energy being generated by us here in this room.
We're a superpower.
A laser-focused fire-up will keep Australia moving. All right, let's talk about clueless Claire O'Neill. And today, what about her performance on Sunday Agenda this morning where, I didn't think we were going to lose the court case. Look, it's a 50-50 proposition. The High Court, without boring everyone, is moving a little further to the left. We kind of had a national conversation about that of recent months. And they decided to rule the way they did. It's a 50-50 proposition. Andrew Giles, the Immigration Minister, tried to BS everyone. Oh, we've been planning for this for months just in case. No, completely flat-footed. And we saw what happened last week. But what about Claire O'Neill? I mean, she's a national security figure in the country and she's as weak as water, isn't she?
Mate, she doesn't seem to have any idea whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean, what staggered me... By the way, you go back to the High Court decision. It just proves everything Dutton said about the voice. If this stuff got to if there was a High Court decision in relation to the powers of voice, etc., which way would that have gone? She seems to me to be totally out of her depth. She's unconvincing. She spent the last couple of months in the reps just attacking Dutton personally. She's about a length and a half better than Andrew Giles, who's equally unconvincing. And the most staggering thing I've seen in politics for yonks, they've gone round to Dutton's office during the week, 5 of them, and said, let's try and work this out.
Yeah.
I have never heard, ever. I mean, there was the great delegation of 5 or 6 to Robert Ray and others who went round to try and get Bob Hawke to resign the leadership, and he kicked them out.
But you're not the government going, the opposition going, help!
It's not the government going to Dutton and saying help. So for all of the attacks that Claire has been making on Dutton that, it was immigration was a shambles under his leadership. Well, hello, if he was so bad, why have they gone round to ask myself? No, look, this is disastrous for Labor. It reinforces every doubt people have about their national security credentials. And a shout out, I might say, to James Patterson, who I think's been fantastic.
Oh, how good is he? How good
is Patterson?
It's one of those moments where she's lucky he's upstairs, not downstairs, because he'd be turning her inside out like a pair of socks. Nicholas, rather than telling us how amazing Claire O'Neill is, I want to ask you this question. Strategy time, right? Sunday night, hardcore's watching. I'm looking you eye to eye. You know that Andrew Giles, not amazing on his feet in the Parliament, which means, just as they did to Linda Burney, every question this week. Every question, every time they're going to try and turn around. One into him, one into him, one into him, one into him. Now, he's going to be there with his briefing notes. But what does a government do when you've got a minister who might be fantastic with the pen and great behind and factional, all the rest of it, but just not great in that 1 hour that everyone sees if they bother to watch Question Time? How does a government try to protect a bad performer?
Well, I don't accept the premise of the question. I think, I think both Andrew Giles and Claire O'Neill are two of the most talented people in the Parliament. As for Andrew Giles,
really,
I mean,
we've been watching.
Don't forget Linda Burney.
I'm talking about Andrew Giles and Claire O'Neill. Andrew Giles has forgotten more about immigration and asylum seeker law than you and I probably know. He is an absolute expert in that area. He has been debating that policy field for decades, and it does appear to be the case that the government was genuinely caught flat-footed by that decision this week because it flew in the face of 20 years of legal precedent.
Sure.
Now, in a matter of days, they've managed to cobble together a response package. I do agree with Michael on one point. It looked pretty messy, but obviously making laws is often like that. But by the end of the week, I think they had a sensible, strong set of arrangements in place. And now I think the government will be hoping they can now move forward.
Michael, same question. They're not going to move on because the expectation is that the numbers, which of course were high double digits, could go to triples, and we could end up getting plenty more on the other side. If I was either of those ministers, I wouldn't be saying, oh, the worst of it's behind me, I'll all be fine, we'll all be okay. Quite rightly, the Libs are going to go, particularly Giles. Do you think they should, or that's last week's issue?
Well, of course they should. I mean, look, Nick's got a bat for his team, but let's be frank. O'Neill and Giles are 9 and 10 batsmen, and they're coming in at 3 and 4, and that's the problem. I mean, Linda Burney is a number 11. Who went out with David Warner to open, and you can rotate the strike on the 6th ball occasionally, but those two ministers look extremely weak in the Parliament. They've got some very good performers in the reps, I might add, but those two are not two of them. And with going to Dutton during the week, the whole country has now got the message that Labor, don't get this, don't understand this. They're wrong-footed. They're not mudlarks on a wet, in a wet track. They're out of their depth on this issue. The more this keeps going, the worse it'll be for Labor, because this is not Labor territory. This is the coalition's bread and butter: national security, defence, refugees, and this is Albo's worst nightmare.
See, Melbourne is a sporting town. I mean, Michael was able to mention swimming, horse racing, you'd multiple all in one. It's a very sporting town. But I want to talk
about... People can understand.
It was sort of like...
Of course they can.
No one understood a word of what Nick was saying.
It was a wide world of sports, of metaphors there.
Yeah, I liked it.
Extraordinary. But look, there's a lot of... histrionics and fear-mongering going on around this debate. Let us all agree that the idea of indefinite detention does fly in the face of the idea of the rule of law and the rights of man, something which I think we all
for people
stand
who've done nothing
for.
wrong, we can have a conversation. And for a child rapist or a murderer?
And the vast majority, if not close to all of these people in question here, have more than done the time for the crimes that they are alleged to have perpetrated. So if they're Aussies, they'd be out. They'd be free sailing.
But the joy is that
because they're caught,
which means you've got to find a way to boot
gap in the immigration system, it's now being exploited by Dutton to fearmonger.
Okay, so let's get to all of this, right? Okay, so again, talking point has gone out amongst the left, which is when all else fails.
It's not the left. It's called the rule of law. If they were Aussies, they'd be free as birds.
Yeah, but the whole point is that they're not. The whole point is they came here illegally. They did something wrong either in the country or were never found to have qualified to come through the front door, which is why we have a front door, so that we can take genuine refugees from genuine places of difficulty. But let's get to this tactic about get Dutton. I mean, you saw the Guardian, the Sydney Morning Herald, you saw sort of the immediate gallery response after this week was not to talk about the tyre fire that was the government's response, but instead to turn to the evil dark heart of Peter Dutton, including when Catherine Murphy sort of sending the signal that, okay, he might have won the week with a bit of sort of, a barrel-chestedness, but all the people who don't like that type of politics Teals, 35 to 55-year-old women who, of course, moved hard against Morrison, and the result was very clear that, change of government, massive loss of seats. Do you think that the politics of Albo post-Voice, remember James Campbell had that story, dirt unit set up inside the Prime Minister's office? I mean, one's been working in Point Piper for about 10 years and hasn't been able to get the gloves on him. But anyway, good luck. Good luck that it's moving now to the PM's office. But is there a difficulty for Dutton here? I'll make it more difficult for you. Is there a difficulty for Dutton that, OK, all of this tough stuff we love, but we're being told that there was a revolution in the electorate at the last election and they don't want tough, they want people who lie to you about power bills?
So, mate, it's a very good question. And the shorter answer I can give is this. No two elections are the same.
Yes.
And the environments change. And 4 or 5 years ago, cost of living wasn't the issue it is today. It's huge now. 3 years ago, COVID was the issue in this country. Things change. I'm very critical of the federal members for not defending Morrison enough, by the way, in the lead up to 22.
Good.
Labor had a very good strategy of undermining Scott Morrison, and he didn't have any hard head kickers out there defending him. Very different when you're in opposition. And are people concerned about this issue, that murders, rapists are out in...
100%.
Yeah, I think people probably are concerned about that, and they'd probably like to know where they are, etc. But here's my point. Post The Voice, the electorate are far more attuned to being lectured by the elites in the media.
Correct.
Okay, they're not listening to The Age and The Guardian and the Sydney Morning Herald and the ABC to the extent that they did pre-Voice, because those organisations were ramming the Voice down their throats and they were wholly rejected. So their credibility has suffered a big hole in it in the eyes of the public.
Well, it's this thing. So obviously every focus group's going to tell Labor, oh, get Dutton, all the ads, black and white, scary music, all the rest of it, right? My thing about tough leadership, right? Australians, apart from anything else, they love a decisive leader, all right? Somebody who's decisive. Now, can you overdo it? Yeah, potentially. However, decisiveness is generally rewarded by the Australian population. And as Morrison, who tried to basically play Albo as he played short, and you can't rerun the 19 election in 22, correct. You can't rerun the 22 election in 24 or 25. Do you think, though, that the Get Dutton, which has basically been, you're watching Question Time. Again, let me explain to everyone again. When you watch Question Time, if you're bored enough to actually watch Question Time, have a look at what the government asks itself. Because obviously they want the good news to get out there, but it's not really about that. It's about sending a message about where their priorities are. And remember, every single question has some dimension of Peter Dutton's terrible, evil, Mr. No, all the rest of it here. So what do you think about the idea of just assuming that sort of putting the devil horns on Dutton will be enough to hold on to power?
Yeah, so I think Labor needs to be very careful. I think Labor has a bit of a track record of underestimating Liberal leaders who come from the Conservative side of the party. Tony Abbott was probably the best example of that, but John Howard was underestimated by Labor for many years.
These are all unelectable.
Ronald Reagan,
and I do think,
Thatcher,
and I
Trump,
do think in recent months, Dutton has shown that he's a far more potent politician than perhaps Labor had thought. You saw what happened with the referendum, and he had a very good week last week, as you said, Michael. They sort of finished the week in Dutton's office writing 6 changes to the legislation to be able to get it through around indefinite detention. So he's having a good run at the moment. Does that mean that Dutton's going to win the next election? No, I don't think so. But I do think it means that Labor is going to take him far more seriously, which they need to do.
Well, correct. However, I also think, and this is my caution to anyone looking at first-term or second-term governments, is that if you think all the issues are starting to run your way because people have got the Harry hits about these things, look at what happened with the Republicans in the midterm elections last time around. The red wave was coming because the economy was so bad, Biden couldn't stand it, all the rest of it, right? You actually do have to offer a solution. I think the biggest issue that I think has the potential to work well for Dutton is that he's got nuclear, right? So the immediate assumption is, well, great, that's a great issue. Please run with that because we're going to run, would you want a nuclear reactor in your backyard? That's assuming that's how people view that. If he's able to make that the centrepiece of, here's my one big idea, here's the net zero, here's energy reliability, that'll be an interesting way to go. But the Libs have to step up on cost of living and start to say what some of their ideas would be. Now, I'm not about to sit here and give them the free ones, but there are some options, because otherwise, if you just point and say, that guy, that guy, that guy, that guy, well, they're not going to change horses just off that. At some point, and that's how Albo, remember, with his BS of $275 on the power bills and all the rest of it.
Does that come through yet, by the way?
Yeah, correct. Tick, tick, tick. So I think you've got to have a positive agenda as well as a smash.
There's absolutely no doubt. Sorry, Nick.
You're going to hit me on nuclear.
There's no doubt whatsoever that in this environment where people are worried, they're looking for solutions. They're looking for change. They're looking for their current situation to change, for better days to be ahead of them. The only way you can convince people that better days are ahead of them is you've got some ideas to convince them of that. Sure. So Dutton's got to come up with 3 or 4 very powerful ideas, and if he does, he's got a very good chance of winning. Can I just say this? If you look at I've been very doubtful that Dutton can get 21 seats to win the election in his own right.
Yeah,
But Albo's on 78, Dutton's on 55. So if Albo loses 12 seats, all which were won by Dutton.
Yes, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Dutton is in 67 and Albo is 66.
Yep.
So if Dutton wins 12 seats, the likelihood is he'll end up Prime Minister, because usually the party with the most seats gets a majority of the independents, and the Teals, to the extent that some of them are still there, they're going to have to go with Dutton. If Dutton wins 12 seats, he'll end up Prime Minister. I can see 6 where Labor are completely gone, and I can think of another 14 or so where Dutton's very much in.
Okay, now,
I'm sorry, I need to ring the bell on
I love it.
2 counts here.
I love it.
The first is, I
love early elections, because he's been right all year, by the way, all year.
The opposition had a good week, granted, but
I'm not
but you're getting ahead of yourselves here, gentlemen. I mean, let's not forget that Labor's primary vote is still above where it was at the last election. And here's the kicker: the Coalition's primary vote is still below where it was. Well below where it was at the last election. So they've got a lot of ground to make up. And yes, there's all this talk about, oh yes, we can win it in the regions, in the outer suburbs, but those 7 Teal seats, unless they can find a way to seriously crack into those, I just cannot.
If I've got to put the plums on the desk, I say it's about a Labor minority at the moment, as opposed to the full changeover, but we'll see.
Second thing I need to ring in the bell on. Hang on.
I'll go through them one by one. He's going to lose Lions. He's going to lose.
No, we've all seen the talking points that were leaked to the Australian.
My talking point. I've got 14. He's going to lose Higgins.
Paul Murray, if you think that nuclear power is Peter Dutton's secret strategy to win the next election, then I'm sorry, you're being popping crazy pills. Because Australians are very, very nervous about nuclear power. But even if you can get past that, the problem with nuclear is it just doesn't stack up. The economics of it do not make any sense in Australia. And so when Australians have a long, hard look at it, they'll go, I'm still nervous about it. And B, that's a stupid policy idea.
Yeah, but no. Currently,
support for nuclear immigration, that definitely has something to it, but not nuclear. That's not a part.
No. I'm not saying that's the front and centre. I'm just saying is that if you've got a signature idea on energy, a signature idea on population, a signature idea on economic. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying,
correct.
This is the one idea and
it's a number.
You got to have a plan. You got to have a
number 5 issue.
Yeah, correct. All right. Well, fascinating to chat. We'll keep doing so during the break, and I'll make sure the non-swearing version is what you'll see in a moment here on Paul Murray Live. Plenty more to talk about with these lads and their bold predictions for the week ahead. Remember, they're legally binding. More in a sec. We're live in Melbourne, which is why I've got the bolt lighting. It's quite exciting, isn't it? Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget the Royal Report about 10 minutes away from now. We're here with Michael Kroger and with Nicholas Rees. Now, as always, support Nicholas with Movember. Best part of 100 grand he's raised over the years, which is very impressive. But also, let's talk about you in the capacity as the Deputy Lord Mayor, where you've been able to get quite a win on a very significant memorial.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So I recently came back from a family holiday in Greece, travelled to Crete and came across a Australian War Memorial in the port of Cervical, which is where the Allies evacuated from Greece during the fight with the Nazis. And there were thousands of Anzacs taken prisoners of war, thousands of lives lost in that battle. And appropriately, there's a war memorial there to commemorate that. And when I visited there, the flags were in a very bad state and the Australian flag was in absolute tatters. So, Yeah, I got pretty fired up about it, it's fair to say. Got on the phone to the Veterans Affairs Minister, Matt Keogh, who looks after memorials. He got straight on it and the flags have been fixed.
Well done.
Yeah, the Aussie flag is flying proud now in that important theatre of war commemorating the bravery and the sacrifice.
Well done, well done. But see, it's little things, but big symbolism, important thing. Well done to you, mate. Last week, I spent some time letting off a few calories, but clearly not enough, about Please.
Say that.
It's a disaster.
I wouldn't say
In the Queensland government is going to spend $400,000 of taxpayers' money so they can basically now bring the Ipsos polling company, who are no longer published in papers, but now inside the tent as a rolling form of a poll for Anastasia Palaszczuk and the Labor government to have a look at between now and the next election. Happened here, and to tremendous effect, if you're able to have literally this in-house information system, it gives you one hell of an advantage. Does that tell you, I mean, obviously they're panicked, but when you've got a year and you've got instant feedback constantly coming back, your ability to shape the message is pretty good, isn't it?
Well, Palaszczuk won't be the leader at the next election, or if she is, Labor are going to lose. So they've got two choices: leave her there and lose, or get her out and have half a chance. But yeah, it does help you shape the message. But this should be illegal.
It's disgraceful.
Political party, you know, we talk about integrity. These are the measures that, I mean, the Liberal Party membership have been drowning in integrity all their lives because everyone's been in small business or business somewhere where you're filling out forms all day long. The Liberal Party in government should say this is now going to be illegal.
Correct.
You know, governments should not be using taxpayer funds for party political purposes. This is very blatant. And I would hope that a future Liberal state and federal governments are going to say this is the type of thing that is not going to happen on our watch, because I think the electorate are disgusted by these types of things, as they should be.
Well, let alone the taxpayer-funded sort of, a glory video that she made for herself. I also think it should extend 12 months out from a federal or state election, no use of taxpayers' funding on anything other than literally health or road safety messages, right? Like nothing else, because it is used constantly. Go for it.
So, look, I agree with you that voters hate this stuff, but this is called the man cave, not the children's cave. This and so we need to talk straight about these things. And the truth is that every state and federal government, Liberal or Labor, run polling like this. Now, if you're doing that to decide policy, I think you've lost your way. But, and this is a controversial thing I'm going to say now, but if you are using it to help understand the community's view on something and how to shape or explain better what you're doing, then I think there is a legitimate role there for it. Now, I know that's not going to be a popular thing to say, but I do think governments can do their jobs better if they are informed by some form of polling or social research.
Well, the only way to justify that is that every member of the parliament gets it.
Yeah,
that's the point. If it's only being held by the leader's office, then it's obviously political. If it's only being held by one side. But if it was, look, we've decided to better inform our parliament, so therefore maybe.
Yeah.
But obviously it's held very tight for the most obvious of reasons. Lads, been fun to hang out. I look forward to doing so after the show. But tell me now, bold prediction, this is legally binding, what's definitely happening this week. The man who's never wrong, Michael Croker.
Never wrong. I'm not a critic of Australian Prime Ministers going overseas. I like Australian Prime Ministers meeting presidents and Prime Ministers because I think it's good for the country. But you're going to find in the weeks ahead, Albo is going to send some deputies to attend a couple of these because this is killing him.
Yeah, I think so. Well, that's the thing. When the Airbus Albo joke works and the thing we played earlier, it's funny.
Hate it.
It's funny, all right?
So again, he's not the Mayor of Marrickville, he's the Prime Minister of Australia, and it belittles Australia for you to criticise him for overseas travel, particularly when Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull did more overseas travel in their first 12 months as Prime Minister than Anthony Abbott has done. This is a confected story that's going on here. He's the Prime Minister of Australia, not the Mayor of Marrickville.
Yeah.
As for a prediction...
Like you people politicise Scott Morrison's,
Correct. Private holiday.
A couple of hours in Hawaii, for goodness sake.
Correct.
Well, Honolulu,
correct.
You're making it up on that front. Now, in terms of prediction, we had a by-election in Victoria today in the state seat of Mulgrave, seat formerly held by Daniel Andrews, Premier. The swing against the government, which you'd normally expect in a by-election, was nowhere near on the scale you would expect for a government that has been in office for as long as it is, and whether you love him or loathe him, has lost a very effective political operator in Daniel Andrews. And so I'm predicting trouble for the Victorian Liberals in the weeks ahead.
I think you can lock that in, set it in stone. Thank you, lads. Do appreciate it. All right, quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live. The Royal Report, the best part of 4 minutes away. Thanks for watching. Love you, Melbourne. We will see you all again tomorrow night. Don't forget highlights of the show at skynews.com.au. Here's the Royal Report with Caroline.